This is a video to go over lesson 5 of unit 1. So we're going to be learning about combined functions today. So let's just do a little bit of a review first of what a function is, and then I'm going to show you how to combine two functions together. Okay, so let's look at our definition here. Given two functions, f and g, I'm going to use colors to highlight them. The composite function, so that's when you compose one function inside another, is defined by f of g. So the way you read this in words is you say f of g. And you can write it with this little open circle like that, or you can use bracket notation and you say f inside g. I like to use the second notation. It makes more sense to me. And then the domain is the intersection of the domains. We'll go over domain in a second. So let's do an example so you can see what it looks like. So let's take the function f of x equals x squared. Let's just review how this function works first. Okay, so you can have an input of a number into a function, and then the function does something to that number and spits out an output, which would be your y value. So let's say you inputted x equals 2, for example. You put it into the function, f of 2, and that would be, so you put the 2 where the x is there, so it'd be 2 squared, and the output would be 4. You could put in another number like -3. You put -3 inside. So you square -3 and you get 9. So for every input, you get an output. You can even put input like a variable, like a letter. You could input, like, for example, k. F of k would be k squared. You don't get a numerical value out, you just get an expression. So for that one, it would just be k. K squared, sorry. So instead of inputting like a symbol or a number, you can also input a function into another function. So let's try inputting g of x into the function f of x. So instead of having 2, -3, or k as our input, we're going to have this function g of x. So just like we squared 2, we squared -3, we squared k, instead we're going to square g of x. I'm going to use my colors here so we can see. So notice the g of x is being squared. Okay, and so the output would be, okay, so g of x is x minus 3, and so, right, so let's write x minus 3 squared. So that would be the output. So when you put a function into another function, what comes out as the output is not a number, it's just another function that's kind of the composite of those two functions together. So the outer part there is going to be the squared piece, that's the f of x part, and then the inner part of your composed function is going to be the x minus 3. Okay, so that's what we're going to be doing in this lesson, is just practicing putting functions inside other functions and then looking at their domains. Okay, so let's look at two other functions here. This time f of x, I'll use yellow for f of x today, and g of x is going to be 1 over x. Okay, so we're going to practice doing the composed function. So the first one we're going to do is f of g. Another way to write that is f of g. So we're going to be putting g of x into the function f of x. So it's going to be f of, actually, I'm going to take 4 minus root, and then where the x is, we're going to put our g of x. Okay, so this is the function f of x, and then where the input goes, we'll put the function g of x. So it'd be 4 minus square root of 1 over x. So that's it. That is the combined function. We need to write the domain now, just because we want to practice writing domain. Okay, so we have to, there's a square root there, which we have to make sure is positive. And then also the x is in the denominator, so we cannot have it be 0. So x must be greater than 0. And not equal to 0 because you can't divide by 0. Okay, next one. This time we're going to have g of f of x. So we're going to go the other way around. So we're going to put, so where the x is in g, we're going to put f of x there. So where you normally would put a number, if you were entering a number into the function, that's where you put your other function. And so this part is the g of x. Okay, so that would be 1 over 4 minus root x. Okay, and that's it. That's all you do. And the domain here, well, first of all, well, there's two things going on. We have the square root, so the x has to be greater than or equal to 0. But also there's going to be one x value we are not allowed to have. So we cannot have 4 minus root x equaling 0 because then we're dividing by 0. So if I move the root x to the other side and we square both sides, we see that x cannot equal 16. Okay, so our domain is going to be x is greater than or equal to 0, x cannot be equal to 16. Greater than 0 because of the square root, and it cannot equal to 16 because then you're dividing by 0. Okay, let's try inputting f into f. You can input functions. So this would be also written as f of x. So 4 minus square root of f of x. So we're inputting the function into that x position. So it'd be 4 minus square root of 4 minus root x. Okay, so this domain is a little bit tricky. We need to make sure that, first of all, x, so here's the domain. Let's look at this part first. For sure, x has to be greater than 0, greater than or equal to 0 because of that square root in red. But then also we have this larger square root in green, and we have to make sure the 4 minus root x is positive. So let's write that out. We have to make sure that 4 minus root x is greater than or equal to 0. If we move the x to the other side, and we square both sides, we see that x has to be less than or equal to 16. So we have two parts of our domain. The x value has to be greater than or equal to 0 and less than or equal to 16. So we can write that together as one statement. We write 0 is less than or equal to x, it's less than or equal to 16. Or you can use interval notation 0, 16 with square brackets. Okay, so this was the green part, and this was the red part. Okay. So that's combining functions. So next we're going to do an example where we combine 3 functions. So you start from the inner part when you do this and then work your way out. If you want, you can pause the video here and try it and then come back and see if you got the answer right, or you can just do it with me. So we're going to compose f of g of h. So another way to write that with brackets is f of g of h of x. So we'll use green this time for h of x. I'll use blue for g of x. Did I use blue in the wrong spot there? Yeah, I did. Blue for g of x. And f here. Okay, so there's my f. There's my g. So you start on the inside. So first thing we're going to do is do g of h of x. So g of h of x is going to be, so for g of x, we square it. So it's going to be h of x squared. Okay. And you can put the h in there. H of x is 1 minus x. So it'd be 1 minus x squared. Okay. And now it's time to input that function into the f function. So the f function says, oops, take 2, multiply it with your input value, and subtract 1. So we're going to input this function we had here, 1 minus x squared. And that's it. I have one too many brackets there I don't actually need. Minus x squared minus 1. Okay, and that's it. Let's write the domain just to stay consistent with example 2. The domain for this, so it's a polynomial function, so the domain is going to be x and r. Okay, so that's how you do a triple layer. You could do 4 or 5 too, although you probably won't be seeing that. Okay, this time we're going to go backwards. This is what we're going to be doing a lot in chapter 3 of this course. You're going to be looking at some functions and then having to pull them apart and understand what the sort of outer function is and what the input function is. So it's a good skill to have because you're going to need this later. So the outer function is going to be what's happening to the inner function. So for this, I immediately see there's a 3x minus 4 inside, and then that's all being put to the power of 7. So my inner function, the g of x, is going to be 3x minus 4, and then the outer function is going to be x to the power of 7, because that's what's happening to the 3x minus 4. It's being put to the power of 7. Okay, so that would be your yellow. That would be blue. Okay, so for this one, same thing. So you might want to pause the video here and try the next two, and then come back and see if you got them right. So this one, the inner function is going to be x squared minus 5, and then the outer one is going to be sine of x. And this one's a little bit trickier, but look for consistencies here. So it's 2 to the power of x plus 3, and then here's another x plus 3. So this is going to be your input, and then the outer piece will be that. So this time your inner function is the x plus 3, and then the outer function is going to be 2 to the x plus x. So notice I put an x where the x plus 3's were. That's where the x plus 3's were inputted into. Okay, good. So that's how to deal with writing the functions. We're going to now practice composing functions on a graph. So when you do this, we're actually going to get numerical values now because I'm actually asking you to input numbers. So when you want to answer f of g of 1, what you're really doing is you're starting with an input, which is x equals 1, and you're inputting it into g of x. So we look at the g of x graph first, and f of 1, so we go to, g of 1, we go to x equals 1, go up to the graph, and we see that g of 1 is equal to 4. Okay, so that would be 4. And then we're going to input, so that's the answer to the inner piece, that's 4. And then we're going to take that input, x equals 4, and input that into f of x. So here's x equals 4, go up, and we get 2. So it's like you're doing 2 questions in one. So first you answer the inner bracket. So we found what g of 1 is equal to, that's 4. And then, so this you could replace with 4, and then you find f of 4, which is 2. So the answer is going to be 2. So I'll rewrite this underneath. So we found the answer to g of 1 was 4, and then that became 2. So you start on the inside and work your way out. So the next question, we have g of 3. So we're going to start by inputting x equals 3 into the g function. I'm not going to draw on the graph this time. We're just going to look at it. So we're going to look for x equals 3, and we find that y is 0. And then we're going to take that, x equals 0, and input it into the g function again. So we get 0. Okay, so now the next one. So you might want to pause the video here and try the next two and then come back and see if you got them right. So here we're going to input x equals 2 into the f function. We get 1. So this would be equal to g of 1. And then we look at the g function and we get 4. Okay, the last one, f of 4. So f of 4 is 2. And then f of 2 is equal to 1. Forgot to box this answer. Oops. Okay. So you don't need to show all of this work with the inputs. You can just show these 2 steps here if you want. Okay. So that's how to compose functions on a graph. So that's it for the lesson today. You need to do the assignment associated with it.